Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I had someone kind of point out the other day, I was making a video talking about strength standards, which I often do, and again, I've had multiple people chime in and say the stuff that, well, Jason, these standards are all well and good, but at the average commercial gym, a guy who can squat 275 to depth for a few reps is actually considered really, really strong, and actually people will be impressed. Any guy who deadlifts 405, people will be really, really impressed. And I'm aware of that, guys. I mean, I've walked into various gyms, like before I built this home gym, throughout the Houston area. I've actually been to all of the 24s that have a functional fitness area. And I even was in one of them that had Alico plates and legit lifting platforms. And I was just doing some rep work, a bunch of triples with 405 on the deadlift. And one of the managers came over and said he's never seen anybody deadlift 405 in his gym before. And I did like 10 sets with it. It wasn't really a heavy day. I was doing a lot of volume deadlifting at the time. He had never seen anyone deadlift 405 in his gym, which was, scary to me. It's scary to me that was the case. And here's the point, guys. There's a reason most guys who go to commercial gyms are weak. There's a reason why actually being able to pause bench 225 for a 5-rep set, actual pause it, isn't that common, even though the bench press is everyone's favorite lift in bro gyms, right? And in commercial gyms. And it's because people haven't trained. And that's the difference, guys. It's not that every single one of these guys couldn't meet these strength standards that I set out. There's plenty of guys who've been training as they call it. They've been working out, they've been exercising for 4 or 5 years, who are way below the strength standards I say are reasonable for 1 year, right? There are plenty of those guys who, if they've done any leg and back work during that time, even if they did a bunch of lat pull downs and leg presses as their leg and back work, I could take any one of those guys and then within 3 to 4 months they would be hitting my novice strength standards. I could probably double their strength in 3 to 4 months on their squat and deadlift. Maybe even their overhead press, their standing press, if they'd been doing the bench press. And the same thing, every one of those guys, you could probably take them, even though they've been training for years. Let's say they've been training for years and they can only bench 185 for, 5 or 6 reps. You could have them to 225 for reps in a few months, easily, even if it took them 5 years to get to the other. Do you know why? Because none of these guys have ever trained. They go in and they work out. So that's why none of these guys are strong. That's why they're not strong. That's why it also has taken all of them years and years to even build the little bit of upper body mass they often have. Because they've never trained. They've just done a bunch of fluff and pump and they've goofed off and they've come in and played. And just because you're lifting hard doesn't mean you're training. In other words, if you're not on a structured program and different lifts detraining, you're doing a bunch of 10 rep sets, but maybe you don't even do the same lifts all the time. Sure, you might be doing 3 sets of 10 or 5 sets of 10 to failure with whatever exercises with a bunch of exercise variation. But because you're not on a structured program, it doesn't matter that you're going hard because you're not doing anything to ensure progression on the primary exercises, right? So you're getting a little bit of muscle growth, you're getting a little bit of strength, but it's going to be, in some cases, only maybe 20 or 30% of what you could have been getting for the exact same amount of minutes spent in the gym for the weeks and months that they did it. And that's really common, guys. That's the norm. That's the reason they don't meet these strength standards. It's not that they lack the ability. It's not oftentimes that they're lazy. So a lot of people say, well, they're just lazy. I don't think that's always the case. Because I'm going to go out on a limb and say, if I see a guy over there pumping away on the bench press and doing forced reps with his partner helping him, and then going over and doing a bunch of cable flies and tricep push downs to failure to where he's turning red and all this stuff, right? They're not lazy. I mean, seriously, if you see the guy over there and he's doing heavy cheat preacher curls and then having a partner help him do 5 or 6 forced reps at the end, we could argue that's silly. But is that guy really lazy? I don't think that he is. I don't think that he's lazy. I think they're misguided in their training approach. I think they just simply do not know how to actually train. I don't think they understand the difference between putting in effort and how hard something seems versus how much stimulation you're getting. And that's the thing. A lot of these guys, they do stuff like that. And the reason they don't get results is because, for example, let's say they come in and do something like that. Well, they put all that effort in and maybe they stimulated a bunch of muscle damage and even a lot of growth potential in their biceps and their back or whatever on their bicep and back day. But they're not on drugs to sustain the muscle protein synthesis. They did a bunch of work. They trained hard. They might have done a bunch of force reps as to failure. The problem is that the recovery time from that volume, because they don't have any drugs to help them, or maybe they do sometimes, is a pretty long recovery window. To the point to where maybe that recovery window ends up eating up 60 to 70% of their growth time, and they don't even get to start growing from the workouts, until 30 hours later, because that's how long it's taking the recovery process to finish enough for those muscles to start growing. And then they don't train them again for a week. And in some cases, they take 3 weeks off from doing the same lifts again because they rotated through a bunch of stuff. They don't do the exact same exercise. So whatever they stimulated in terms of motor patterns detrains. And in fact, training a muscle only once a week, there will be a little bit of muscle loss because of the long-term time between training it again. So they're creating a suboptimal recovery and growth window with a suboptimal frequency, and oftentimes with various detraining involved. All right? So what happens? They grow much, much, much slower. Even on all those muscles they're just beating up, they're growing slower. They're growing slower because they're again, the stress recovery adaptation cycle is extremely skewed for those people. Because again, they're not training, they're just coming in and working out. They're just working out. They're just going hard in the paint. But they're not actually doing that much productive. Because if that same amount of effort was put into proper structured training, on their other basic exercises, and I'm not saying they can't come in and do some fluff and pump. I know I use that term, but at the end of the day, look, if you want to do some curls and tricep extensions, do some curls and tricep extensions. Just make sure they're not interfering with the recovery of your main lifts, In other words, if you're going to do a bench and overhead press 2 or 3 days a week, training them with a structured progression pattern and tracking your workloads, if you do a bunch of force reps on cable tricep extensions, or you do 5 sets of them to failure, expect it to interfere with your bench press session, which means you're going to grow slower. In that case, it's a problem. But look, if you want to do some tricep work or some bicep work or some work for your side delts, by all means do so. So even guys who are training for these other things, training a little bit bro, that's fine. Do the stuff. If it makes you happy and you want to ensure that extra growth, that's fine. Just make sure you don't beat those up so hard that it interferes with your primary training effect. Understand them for what they are, secondary exercises. But, that's the point. If any of these guys, oftentimes who are still weak, because everyone says, well, your standards are wrong, because most guys are still way weak by your standards who've been going to the gym for years. Well, again, they've never trained. Those guys have all started building enough of a base that, again, I promise you, if you were to give me a bunch of those guys who are weak-ass squatters, they're squatting 225 for 5 or 6 reps still, they're benching 185 for 6 or 7 reps is all they can do. Maybe they've never done a deadlift. You give me those guys for 3 or 4 months and let me work with them 3 days a week. And I promise you, every one of those guys who are so weak now would be hitting my novice numbers within a few months on proper structured training if you take all the BS out. They would hit all those numbers and they would all gain muscle. They would all gain strength. You could just throw them back on the tail end of a proper novice program and they would all make gains again. They would reach those numbers in no time because they've already got some training effect. They've already built some foundation. They've got bone density. They've got some connective tissue. They've got work capacity. Any one of those guys, if they were to just start actually training, not working out, but training on a structured program, they would meet strength standards, and people need to understand that. It's not that they can't do it, it's that they won't do it. And it may not even be because they're lazy. It could just be because they are misinformed due to the silly bodybuilding culture that's influenced them. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.